tarde a todas e todos que nos acompanham.
Good afternoon for those who are following us. It's a pleasure to follow with our International Tax Law Congress in this innovative format, and today we have a roundtable that synthesizes and places all those questions proposed by the panelists and attendees of this Congress. We will divide it. I will do this work. We'll dividing amongst our table and panel friends, peers. I'm sorry. So we're going to address those issues placed during the Congress. So I will pass the floor to our friend from IBDT to make the table, then ask the floor again so we can address the questions. So good afternoon, my friends, and those who are with us up to now. Good afternoon. Thank you for Professor José Maria Arruda for the presentation. So I would like first to thank IBDT for the invitation to be part as a moderator of this panel by well-known and tax counselors. It's an honor to be part of this panel with all of you and the professor Luiz Flávio Neto, Luiz Eduardo Schweiri. I'm very pleased to be part of this outstanding professional. So I will present my panel members. I think you know most of them, but it's a pleasure to introduce them. First, we have the President José Maria de Arruda Andrade, Associate Professor at USP, Ana Carolina Monguilod. Please correct me if I'm spelling your name wrong. She's LLM, Leiden University. And now he's reading your resume. Professor Carlos Otávio Ferreira de Almeida, professor at IBDT and PUC Campinas. And now he's reading your resume, Professor. And he was also my professor during this semester in some subjects. Thank you very much, Professor. And now, Professor Paulo Victor Vieira da Rocha, professor of IBDT, also member of this panel, and having the opportunity of studying with him. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to have you here with us. Valéria de Alessandro in Argentina. Hello, Professor Valéria, postgraduate professor of UCA. Please be welcome to this panel. Professor Ricardo Maitto da Silveira, coordinator of introduction course in tax law here at IBDT also, and he's reading your resume, and he's a partner at Tosini Freire Attorneys at Law, and Professor Romero Tavares, professor at Insper of International Tax Law professor, and he's also reading your resume. So thank you very much for your attendance, collaborating to this panel. So we open the floor now to Professor José Maria Arruda to start the work. So take the floor. So it's a pleasure to be here with you all. I will start just explaining a bit. During the Congress, we received several questions during presentations, and according to the subject of each panel, we tried to respect the subject of each panel. We summarize the question as possible, so we place the name, if possible, we place the name of who is asking the question. And my friends, I will share with my table, but the panel friends. And so in order to abide by the given time so all can comment. I ask you to be straightforward, so I will start with these questions. So, two questions to Ricardo Maitto. First, the first was made by João Américo, and the question is, Ricardo, the proposals by OECD regarding impacts on new technologies based on services, and then we have the acronyms: Internet Service, IS, PAS, SAS, WAS, and so forth. And you know so well, related with the panel pillars 1 and 2 that opened the Congress and following the same line, and we can think about domestic Seara. So, about new technologies in face of both contexts. The second question by Luna Pantoja, it's regarding software licenses to taxation in Brazil, especially after COSIT 017 related with the subject addressed by the Minister Gurgel of the STF on the last panel yesterday. So these are the two questions. So Ricardo Maito, please take the floor. Thank you, José Maria. First, I would like to congratulate the coordinators of the Congress. Clearly, it's a huge success, and for some time now. And this year, in spite of not being physically together, the success is upheld. Professor Eduardo Schwery and Maitto. I congratulate my panel peers, and I'm very happy of being part of this panel. And because we have lots of questions to address and not much time to do so, I will be straightforward regarding the questions. We have two made by João and Luna regarding that talks a bit with the first and last panel of yesterday. So the first question by João, the approach and proposal of OECD regarding taxation of new technologies, and there's a list of acronyms. So the question is very good. We know that in the hearing, we have at the public here, we have many students, and they want to be familiar with all the history, context, and the pillars. So at the beginning, yesterday, we talked a lot about pillars 1 and 2. It's important this question because it gives us opportunity to try to understand its context. OECD regarding income taxation is not proposing solution near market for specific products. So questions by João, how it's going to be taxed according to SAS and so forth. Proposal by OECD regarding income taxation is earmarked for business models that have been identified. Many companies today, based on what we call digitalization of economy, can operate and generate profits and be taxable in many jurisdictions without physical presence. The problem arising from is how to tax these profits, as developed countries, especially those where jurisdiction is the consumer market, can tax the profit arising from this transaction. According to OECD proposal, historically, regarding digital economy, is what is reflected on Action 1 from BEPS. Some years ago, it was proposed, and basically, we have three. First one, try to remodel the idea of connection element to create new nexus approach defining guidelines that give or grant to the source country the possibility to tax one transaction, its profit, based on elements that connect nexus of the activity with the country. And these elements are not bound to physical presence. This is the first one from the PEP's Action 1 report. The second one, it's tax withheld at source, which is not new for us in Brazil. This is what we do here. Perhaps for the other countries it is, but not for us. The third is equalization tax, is a way of trying to tax a foreign developing activities in a certain country, trading goods and services, digital goods and services in a certain country to be equitable to a certain individual doing the same transaction regarding domestic. So treating foreigners and nationals the same way. And proposition talked, it was done in a country like India. This is BEPS action report. Then we leap, and these are proposals, of course, no consensus yet. And then we reach the idea of pillars 1 and 2. Basically, on a no general line, pillar 1, the idea that comes from pillar 1 is trying to tax transaction generated within digital economy. Look at the economic group, not just the jurisdiction of the activity. It's the economic group to be taxed, and trying to define based on a fixed location what would be the profit attributed to each transaction. So it's a cross-border transaction of all groups, trying to define the share earmarked for each country. This is the main idea behind Pillar 1. And Pillar 2, adding to this concept, the idea basically is trying to prohibit that practice very common, especially for tech companies, where they can operate in different consumer markets without physical presence and allocate important part of their profits for low taxation countries. So these are measures that you allow adjustment on a tax basis of economic groups to ensure that each country will have minimum taxation of profit. These are the proposals of OECD, three ideas, now recently pillars 1 and 2. Important to debate here is proposals out of the OECD. So there's a huge lack of consensus. The idea is to have a methodology to be uniform by the end of this year, or perhaps the beginning of next year. We saw yesterday the opinion by Professor Schueri. He's static regarding this, and I'm in line with his position. I think it's difficult for us to think in ideas like this one of group taxation. Imagine the complexity. So it's very difficult to reach a consensus in this debate. And what we have seen simultaneous individual initiatives, country by country, everything that goes against the consensus. So countries are introducing step by step legislation and trying to tax transactions that are carried out in digital economy. You have India, some suggestion in Italy, France, and even in those countries not developed. Yesterday during the panel, a friend represented the African continent mentioning that Nigeria, they have their own suggestion to create a digital tech as of next year. So on an overall, these are the propositions of by OECD for tax income of digital economy. As for Brazil, now on our side, we have tax withheld at source. So when we talk about digital economy, we had this tax withheld at source with the general guideline So, regardless being physically present or not. And this would represent an innovative position of Brazil. It's not innovative. It's by chance that happened that Brazil has this sort of taxation based on its laws, on what we will have to debate probably if this is the right mechanism to tax digital economy activities. The rate of 15% a tax withheld at source that not necessarily talks with the initiatives we've seen in other countries of 6, 3, 5% rate. If we think today there's a trend and clear one to reduce corporate rates of countries, if we think USA with 21, UK 19, the average of OECD 23, it's right to say that the one we have of 15% is too high. It's a high cost as an initiative to tax these digital products, i.e., this will generate an imbalance between the countries of source and residence. Now, moving towards the second question by Luna regarding how is the issue regarding software license taxes regarding the Act of 017. She's talking about the change of the inland revenue, that solution, I think it's number 18 of 016, by which inland revenue started to understand. It was a change on the understanding, not legislation, understanding that transactions of remittance of resources for software license would levy a tax fee of 15%. So to talk about licenses is very complex. It would take a lot of time here. It's very confused when we talk about software licenses. Just think about, we are decades talking about the IVA regarding this without so we think that in the next month we will think about the STF about this. I think we hope that it will decide this subject. What I want to talk about is not IMS, but it's tax withheld the source. So in the past, we are debating at the IVA. So it's a guideline of the STF with a precedent by the end of the 90s. Weird division between software from the shelves in large scale commercialization and by order, the one done specifically for the use of a specific client. In the middle of the way, you had one customized that was more, depending on the level of customization, was more connected to the off the shelf. So view by the Inland Revenue regarding the taxation of transactions of Brazilian companies giving licensing softwares with a foreign one. The Inland Revenue said if the software is a shelf one, equiparization is a merchandise, never so it's buying a merchandise. It's dealt like this, not withheld a source in the scenario that's not ordinary, impossible to see where you have payments of a software by order, then it would equal to services. So 15% income tax being levied. What happened is that in 017, Inland Revenues changed her stand, saying, forget what I sustained before. I think we have to make a division that's the following. Brazilian companies that license software for commercialization and pay remit resources abroad by the right of commercialization of softwares. This payment has the nature of royalties and must be taxed by the rate of 15%. And when the company license software for own use, then it is effective the classic understanding of STF. If it's a off the shelf, no income, and if it's by order, there's income, there's taxation. So took companies by surprise. Up to them, it's not a surprise. It's a transaction most of the time not taxable, but we didn't think what are the effects on double taxation agreements, but recently what we have seen, according to the excise, it entered the field of double taxation and IR of 15% to be levied. So the hypothesis where I have remittance according to double taxation agreements, I have to go back to the agreement, and then when we enforce it, and for the OECD transaction with distribution of software licenses, so it's bought to be resold, must be taxed and fall within the agreements based on Article 7, meaning that Brazil could not tax at source these transactions. This subject is going to court now. We will see how it will develop. As I said, up to then, we didn't talk about too much enforcement of double taxation agreements, sometimes with remittance, not subject to taxation. And then just to wrap up, perhaps I'm a bit over time, but just wrapping up, all this regarding the taxation of software licenses was something from the past. But today, trans- transactions we see today in practical terms are done through licensing of softwares. Most of the cases is the software as a service. People don't acquire license of software. You lease it based on a more complex contract, that it's the use of a license, technical services, updating. So the program we are using now for the Congress, Zoom, is a typical example of this. It's the subscription pay per use. If you don't use, you don't pay it. So the idea is different from what we had in the past. And the challenge to face is that in Brazil, import of service is not just subject to income tax. We know, we listen, Minister Gurgel brilliantly explained. So it's a transaction that nominally can reach of a taxation of 40%, depending, and even 50%. I think this is a big challenge Brazil will have for the taxation of transactions regarding software in the future. I will stop and pass the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Ricardo. Recently, the high courts have regained this shelf product term. It's used in case of taxes on pharmaceutical products. So it's done in manipulation drugstores, identified as customized. So that's the classification. I will address some issues to Professor Carlos Otávio de Almeida. The theme is Pillar 1, Pillar 2 of COVID, one of the first themes of this forum. Three questions. The third one also deals with COVID. So Professor Carlos de Almeida, Leonardo Pignatari asks, OECD believes that it's possible to have a consensus to a unified approach until end of 2020 or 21. Is there any plan B in case the consensus is not settled? Second, Aide Vilaces, would we have a role for the G4 group in the approval of the minimum standards and to reach solutions in the international tax law system and from now on? And the third one is food for thought for our director Bianco. If you come to Brazil and you kill someone and stay 10 years in jail, it's considered tax resident in Brazil in this period. For this third question of João Bianco, Bill Gates killing someone here and staying 10 years, I would like to ask this to Carlos de Almeida and Professor Valéria Alessandro. What's your perspective from the view of Argentina, internationally speaking? The third question, I would like to listen you to. Thank you, President José Maria Andrade. It's a pleasure to be here. Yesterday, you were, I would say, your PhD presented to me. So I greet all my colleagues, the panelists here. It's an honor to be here, sharing with you and learning with you in this forum. And I greet IBDT and thank Dr. Ricardo, Professor Schwer, and Luis Flávio for the opportunity in this forum. Congratulations. Rodrigo Maia was also in the participation of the organization. So we have an opportunity to take part in very gladly. I take the chance. Our forum is concerned about COVID issues as well. Answering these questions, I'll try to do a link. Imagine something that what's ahead of us. Question of Leonardo. If we believe a consensus exists, a final approach, as Ricardo has said recently, let's do it something different because the technical explanation already given by Ricardo. Let's bear in mind what happened in the OECD report, and it's been dwelt and prepared by the steering group of the inclusive framework to have an idea and answer directly to Leonardo. We have a meeting beginning of October. We will have it. The inclusive framework will consider the results of this report. In November, the G20 will do the analysis. So what's there today, if there is no consensus, will be in December. And naturally, bearing in mind again what Ricardo has said, we would hardly get any solution in 2020. We know and we are used to effects when it refers to time. You see? So the due is almost soon, and we feel that the consensus is not solved yet. So in the blueprint, there are some considerations. We know technically it's a very advanced work construing the building blocks, something that's necessary to do the reallocation of the income. It's not a routine one. So this work is going ahead, but the report that we've had the opportunity to read, it said that there is, in fact, some difficulties, technical difficulties, but mainly political difficulties, which are the critical points in terms of difficulties. First, the scope. How is it done? This pillar one, the scope, the reach. Some want digital economy, others want all the multis and etc., all the digital economy together, inserted in the same context. I don't think it will be a solution. Second critical point, politically speaking, and how much in terms of profit it will go to the jurisdictions to increase their power.
Então, também não há ainda
It's not easy. We don't have this level yet. This threshold is not clear to us. And we're getting to the date. Third point would be tax certainty. This amount aim in A phase concerning digital marketing, it would go beyond a threshold where you have physical presence wavelengths to calculate the amount B, but there is some discussions among the countries to calculate A and B, if it's tax withheld at source or not. This amount B, it's discussed if in the calculation, for instance, of profits concerning expenses with marketing and distribution, practically, if they are the priority and obtained via digital way in the marketing and distribution, shouldn't it be considered included in the amount A, not B? So you have more tax in the country of origin. So there is no political consensus, and there are very nevralgic points in the process. Last but not least, the scope of amount B. Some people want to increase, some people want to decrease. So these 4 points, Leonardo and all of you, we consider to be hard to assess in short times. So going back to the panel and Professor Schweire's explanation, we had and a certain skepticism said, I'm skeptical, I don't see any result here. And others said, I am optimist. Okay, right or wrong, what we understand is a political issue. So political issue is susceptible to chronological aspects. So arrangements, political arrangements that happen before the time we expect. The opposite is normally the one that is chosen happens. So 2021, we have a new scenario that's the following. In fact, today, recently, we had a position presented by the President of European Committee. She is, no, the European Committee is doing its best to have a consensus, globally speaking. And due to the decision taken by the United States in June this year concerning Pillar 1, it's placed that the European Union will have unilateral measures in the beginning of 2021. So we have political pressure, and if it happens, it will be a margin of consensus in 2001. The scenario to solve the problem, European case, we would have the help is 150 billion euros. How do we form this package? OECD said this week, if I'm not mistaken, the president in European Commission said that it has to be a very fair and modern process. And the grid taxes have to be considered. So after the COVID situation, we will have these two aspects. So in our Congress, we have Professor Alison Richards, and she published an article to help in terms of recovery and combat COVID's harmful situation. It should be a Pillar 3 concerning tax on existing profits after Pillar 1 and 2. And then there is a consensus establishing the threshold, and this tax would be for multinationals, multinational companies that had profit in this period where the other companies had losses. So it's a way to balance the issue. It's an idea, and we mention it because it's a point that was related to COVID as well. Idea? I think it's interesting the question she placed. On G24, it's a group of countries, developing countries. Brazil was part of it. Latin America, Africa, and Asia, basically, developing countries. It's a group that's linked to monetary issues and development affairs. It's very interesting. This group, does it have a role, a participation in digital issues and solutions of international tax? And so what's been adopted as well? Action 5, 6, 13, and 14, controlled by inclusive framework. We have no way out. That's the steering. So 177 countries on side and 24 on the other side. So the blueprint of Pillar 1 says that.
Peraí, gente, deu branco aqui, acredita? Pensava eu. Vamos lá. Ele não fala.
Okay. It says, I got it, yeah. The objective, in fact, of all this work is looking for a globalized system that is fair, modern, and sustainable. And it's also said in this report that it includes all the countries, developed or in developing countries. So it's there in the report. We know countries that are part of the G24 and those that are in the inclusive framework. So those that take part in it may have some advantage. Last question, briefly, passing the floor to Professor Valéria, our director, Professor Bianco. Very interesting, his position. And I take advantage of it to say about it that it's an issue about residence. And we consider not only putting the person in jail, but the person is here, let us say, because of COVID, the person is sick, staying here over 186 days. It's an objective criteria that Brazil considers to characterize residence in Brazil. So, doing an analysis of a phenomenon that is happening, and in Brazil, we're not discussing it very much. It's brain drain. We are not working about tax competition in terms of human participation, and Brazil is in loss in terms of that. So it's a sovereignty of the state, and that's our residence reality. And there are two types of individuals that are the target of policies to find and maintain the intellectual capital, people that are skilled, and they are the high-level futures. So they have to be retained, kept in the companies. And in Brazil, we don't find a policy that is clear in this sense. So we either work with norms that, let's say, that we promote importation and migration, and we avoid immigration. So in this case, we call we push factors, corruption, recession, high taxing. So concerning public expenses and incomes, these are push factors that push people out when they have an intellectual sovereignty. In this case, Brazil is facing problems, interesting aspects listed by IBDT, our Institute of Research. We have qualified people and there is market for them, but they leave the country. And since 2003, we're seeing that. So we are in the 105th place to attract brain games and brain retention. And so we've seen many Brazilians in the United States, 95% of those that went to US, they were graduated or postgraduated, MBA, etc., and sometimes PhD. 93% left the country. And I would say that in this competition for human capital, we're losing skilled people. And it's very bad for the developing of the country because we have to regain the benefits. because it pushes our budget. So we have to invest in people, having more possibilities of employment in terms of science and technology. And there are also tax individuals. So Professor Bianchi, Brazil should wake up and work in this issue, considering regaining post-COVID the brain gains. So the possibility is big. Thank you, José Maria. Now, time.
Professor Valéria, please, regarding Bill Gates. Thank you, José Maria. Well, thank you, Carlos. Eu vou
that I was actually born in Brazil. This is a fact that a few people know, but I moved to Argentina when I was 7, so I forgot most of my good Portuguese, though I understand. So many thanks for having invited me to join this very brilliant panel. Special thanks to Luis Flavio Neto and all the authorities, and thank you for the brilliant coordination of the panel. I'm enjoying it a lot. And I really loved that Bill Gates question. It is a very, interesting question. And it leads to something that is currently going on in Argentina. It is not very common currently that new families and individuals are interested to moving right now to Argentina. Rather, the tendency is the contrary. Everyone wants to flee away, and we have a lot of migration, as Carlos pointed out. There are two big tendencies. One is here in Argentina, the migration of very high net worth families and individuals, and also companies, and also migration of brains. We also experience that. But the rules are quite the same, both for outbound families and for inbound families who come to Argentina. So the key factor in the Bill Gates gate would be intentionality. Our legislation, as well as our tax authorities, tend to have a very close look at what the individual or the family intends to do, no matter or regardless as how many days it is spending, for instance, in Argentina or abroad when it is moving Argentinian family. So in a case, let's think Bill Gates or anyone moves to Argentina and it's not its real intention to be in Argentina, for instance, because he's in prison or because he's ill, or even due to labor reasons, to work reasons, where our legislation provides that in these cases, this person or this family or this company would not acquire the Argentinian tax residence status. So we do have such a provision in our legislation, and tax authorities are very used to see these kind of situations and tend to respect it, and also our jurisprudence and case law. And intentionality is also very used for individuals moving abroad. In Argentina, many companies and families are facing right now audits and tax assessments because tax authorities deem that there is an abusive tax planning and that the residency has not been correctly lost. So this is very common now in Argentina. Actually, one of the very seductive countries is Uruguay. Uruguay, compared to Argentina, has a very attractive tax system. One of the other questions raised in this Congress was about COVID. Well, COVID, what has Argentina done with COVID? Well, it has created new taxes. It has increased the current tax rate of current taxes. And right now, today, they are discussing at the Congress very original, so to say, tax on property. It is a new personal assets tax with very high tax rates, which would overlap with the existing ones. We have now tax rates which is almost 3% if the assets are abroad. Well, now we will have an extra almost 6% tax rate, new tax on these same assets due to COVID. So we can see here that, on the contrary to many other countries in the world, well, Argentina is creating new taxes. I heard at the beginning in the introduction that Ricardo was terrified because in Brazil you talk about a 15% tax rate. Well, here we have 30% and 21% when it's VAT. So we are used to this high tax pressure. And well, regarding OECD and G20 legislations and directives and pillars, well, we can say that Argentina is a very good student. It is actually seated in the front row, and it has adopted most of the suggestions, and it has moved forward in a very exaggerated manner, maybe. Actually, now, and talking about digital services, companies like Uber, Netflix, Airbnb, well, Expedia, Spotify are facing here in Argentina tax assessments. So the tax authorities are very aggressive, are very, well, behind these companies. And what happens, of course, as in many jurisdictions, and I see Brazil is not the exception, is that they tend to attribute all income in Argentina. And the principle is the substance over form. Although our legislation is not very well prepared yet for that kind of taxation, in Argentina it usually happens that tax authorities and courts move faster than legislation. This is actually very, very usual, and it is what is happening with the digital services. So we have some provisions and some digital taxes already vigent in Argentina. We have special VAT provisions, and we have also provincial taxes that, well, are especially deemed at these digital services and digital economy activities. And we also have some exemptions when we are talking about export of digital services. This is working currently good, and in general terms, we have very low litigation so far, so this is something good. But we do have, which is also quite new and quite, well, polemic, customs duties applied to export of digital services and to services in general. These duties were of 12%, and now they have been lowered to 5%. So yes, a lot going on in Argentina. I heard there was also a question about donations and deductibility of donations. Well, we do have rules concerning that kind of benefits in Argentina, but they are interpreted in a very strict manner. Actually, we have a list of entities to which someone could donate funds, and only that entities are available for donations that could be eventually deducted. And there is also a gift tax in the province of Buenos Aires, which is a very high tax rate. It used to be 22%, which is very, very expensive. And this gift tax, which is not only with the cause of debt, but also applicable and special applicable to donations, is intended now to be applied at a federal level. So there are a lot of donations going on right now in Argentina, also within families and within companies, which are not especially deductible, but anyway, they are moving in that sense, just to be one step ahead of this big reforms we are going to face in a very immediate future. So thank you very much.
Obrigado, professora Valéria. Agora nós vamos passar para o tema de preço de transferência. Eu vou pedir para a professora Ana Carolina e para o professor Romero fazerem as suas considerações. Eu anotei aqui 3 questões dos nossos congressistas, e aí eu vou pedir para que vocês escolham uma ou 2 delas, porque a gente ainda tem mais uma sequência de perguntas para o Paulo Vitor, tá bom? Se vocês puderem, por favor, controlar. A primeira palavra vai ser para a Ana Carolina, tá? Então, você escolhe, por favor, professora, responder 2 ou uma delas, conforme o tempo. Então, vamos lá. O nosso amigo Daniel Teixeira Prates, do IBDT, e também a Giana Alves dos Santos, Han, perguntam, respectivamente, qual seria o resultado da aplicação das margens fixas no atual cenário de prejuízos gerados pela Covid-19, bem como se será melhor se priorizar o CUP, né, Compare Uncontrolled Prices, no lugar do RPM, Resale Price Methods. O Gustavo Pagliuso, ele questiona se os safe harbors considerados no projeto de convergência das regras de preço de transferência brasileiras ao padrão OCDE não se desviam do conceito original de safe harbor e, possivelmente, conflitam com o princípio do arm's length. Outros membros da OCDE aceitariam aplicar safe harbors a atividades substantivas? E, por fim, o nosso colega de mesa, Ricardo Maitto, e também o Gustavo Pagliuso, nós juntamos aqui em uma pergunta, falam da necessidade de ajustes não serem somente fiscais, mas contábeis e efetivos, com o eventual direito do contribuinte brasileiro de, ao receber ajustes, ajustar o preço e recuperar os tributos pagos na importação. Em sentido contrário, podendo a empresa receber o ajuste de fora, poderia ela pagar uma complementação? Então, são 3 perguntas com vários elementos, aí eu pediria para a Ana organizar a sua fala em alguns desses pontos, e depois o professor Romero.
Muito bem. Bom, primeiramente, eu queria agradecer demais ao IBDT pelo convite de estar aqui com vocês, colegas de painel tão ilustres, o nosso mediador, o José Maria, o nosso presidente de mesa, o Eugênio, e também um agradecimento especial aos coordenadores do evento, o professor Luiz Eduardo Freire, o professor Luiz Flávio Neto, o Rodrigo. Muito obrigada pelo convite, parabéns pelo maravilhoso evento. As perguntas, indo direto para as perguntas, que o tempo é curto, mas as perguntas são todas extremamente interessantes. Eu vou tentar aqui, primeiramente, tratar dessa questão das margens fixas e do fato de que seria interessante priorizar o CUP no lugar do Resale Price Method, nessa situação de Covid, de crise, de prejuízo, perguntas feitas pelo Daniel Prates e pela Giana. Olha, sim, as margens fixas, né, elas são desvantajosas numa situação como aquela que nós vivemos, isso é claro, mas, e sim, eu concordo que as empresas, elas vão tentar usar o CUP, né, porque elas vão tentar fugir das margens fixas para tentar usar um método que as permita se aproximar mais do que se pratica no mercado. Mas o grande problema permanece, que é o problema de se achar comparáveis, né? Então, o ideal seria, sim, usar um CUP nesse tipo de situação, mas talvez ele seja quase impossível por conta da ausência de comparáveis. Agora, a situação atual é excepcional. A última vez que aconteceu algo como aquilo que nós estamos vivendo hoje foi há 100 anos, né?
Today, it has happened with, in Spain, so with the pandemic situation there 100 years ago, so we're having the same situation now. So this type of momentum that we're crossing and not using the arm's length principle, so it's better to have this risk because this type of situation is exceptional, and maybe it's preferred to avoid legal uncertainty using the arm's length, applying and doing the study specifically in a very complex way. I think that in the process of convergence of our rules, Brazilian ones to OECD status, it's the system in and out. There is risk in terms of non-taxing. So it has, so in this case, underlying taxation. So if the margins that we presently adopt, the fixed one, if they are modernized and updated and detailed, because if we do studies to improve these fixed margins, being closer to what would be a price of the arm's length, the present situation would not be so complicated. So adopting fixed margins, if they are updated, modernized, and they have the possibility of up in and up out with the situation we're facing now, it would be an up out. But again, I understand that the idea apparently has been overcome due to risks of double taxation risk of not having it. So when we abandon the, the fixed ones and we start with arm's length principle, those that will adopt the APAs, the situation, the present situation would be a problem as well. How can they observe what's happening with the APAs? And we have heard people that live abroad that are reconsidering the APAs because in this pandemic status, that economic crisis, they will not be able to fulfill. So, question of Gustavo about the safe harbors considered in the converging process of transfer price standard OECD. Do, do they deviate from the original concept of safe harbor so there is conflict with the arm's length principle? I understand that the consultation, due to objectives they have, what are the objectives of the consultation that is presently open to be with the revenue and with OECD discussing all the aspects. So the idea of this consultation is exactly studying, doing a research to study and adjust and help Brazil to prove to have the safe harbors and APAs that in this convergence project that can be a trauma. There are countries that suffered with this convergence. So this project, we would like us to have it, not to lose completely the simplicity and the safety, legal safety that we have in our legislation. So we consider that adhering to this will from the part of OECD and the federal revenue using safe harbors for situations which are a bit vaster, exactly because we want to maintain in our system a minimum level of simplicity and safety in terms of legal aspects. So, but this consultation, the safe harbor should not be applied in complex cases with risk in terms of transfer price, where you do not project the safe harbor closely to the principle of arm's length. There is a concern. We feel that in the public consultation on the part of revenue and the OECD to develop safe harbors in a sufficient way that is careful enough not to be far from the arm's length principle, because in this case, if they do, the idea of consultation would be putting us with an APA, not a safe harbor. This week, we had the pleasure to have in IBDF, in Brazil Association of Financial Law, Federal Revenue, OECD, experts in transfer price from other countries, and we received representatives of some excise, the international excise. We had meetings representatives from UK, Mexico, and US excises. So they told us their experience in the preparation of the safe harbors and the recommendation that the OECD does, safe harbors have to be designed in a bilateral way. The recommendation is very important. If we can do this type of work, if federal revenue can do this type of work with the most important players, commercial players in Brazil, maybe we would be able to reach a safe harbor that is closer to arm's length, and it will have more legal safety and avoid double taxation. I think this recommendation is very important, but in truth, what refers to this process of convergence, we're taking some steps. It's a moment of studies and analysis and discussions, and that's why it's so important to consider very carefully the possibility of answering to this question from the part of OECD and federal revenue. With our inputs, that can help to construct and build the safe harbors, and other solutions will be found. Now, the third question will be passed on to my colleague here, Romero. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good afternoon. So also I'm going to save time. Thank you, IBDT, Professor Luis Freire, Fabio, and my panelists. I cannot evade of commenting the two first questions because they have all to do with the work I've developed with ACNI during the last 3 years regarding this in support to the inland revenue and OECD and several countries specifically where we are dealing within the mutual cooperation and trust. And also specifically regarding the points of the first questions, I'd like to quote the first one, Daniel Giana, to show how rich it is the possibilities of resolution of disputes and to reach the best answer when we don't work just with three methods, when we work with method cup cost plus or minus, we are using a tight jacket of the transactional methods where comparables were even further difficult, as Ana Carolina mentioned it. Trying to look at comparable of transaction based on cup, it's harder than trying to work with comparables of companies' transactions like total net margin methods based on profitability, P&M, and profit split are methods that are further used in practical levels because through them we can make feasible the comparability study, i.e. within the methodologies of guidelines that interpret arm's length. Let's not confuse guidelines with arm's length. They're the best interpretation of arm's length. Article 9 law within Article 9 of Model Convention as well of basic legislation of countries. Methodology toolkit to reach arm's length in constant development never stops and never stops developing, and where it finds the base safe harbor in the infra legal Seattle. Within the guidelines safeguards with all developments, they added to the three initial methods plus two. When you have the additional two, you can work with the outlooks of losses. So both in a scenario where the company standard low total net margin method is not integrated company with other in the production of income, and the other one when more than one part is contributing with assets function so invaluable if the right fit method would the profit split on PNN or the other can through benchmarks you can find that loss is the market of outcome for that moment to be compared. Both methods, they bring in fact closer to reality. This methodology closer even to the legal principle of arm's length in a specific situation like the one we experienced, COVID-19. And Jenny and Daniel question is very pertinent. It shows not only the methodology of fixed margins, but also availability of methods more limited than the five offered today in the toolkit of guidelines and can result in, let's say, parameters of comparability and imposition tax-wise, and out of what would be not only reality of taxpayers of economy as a whole, but what would be the legal criteria, which is the subject matter of this price control for transfer pricing. In this case, it's a rule of allocation and anti-abuse. And for a scenario COVID-19, it's not loss is not abuse, but imposing a margin in this scenario. It's full disconnection with reality. This leads me to the second point. Gustavo Palius, although Anna mentioned in more than one time to make it clear by the working group involved engaged doing fantastic work more than 2 years on the inland revenue and OECD in development of this convergency. Clearly it was said we will not innovate too much in the Brazilian toolkit of the safe harbors. We will not be too bold not to incur in the risk of double taxation that Anna mentioned very well. But we will have a difficulty, practical level regarding it. Solve and trying to solve this practical level difficulty. It is possible to work with the outlook of development of safe harbors, not close to arm's length, but within it. Even argument has limitations in the second part of analysis, which is comparability analysis. Summarizing within the 10 minutes given, but the economic study of transfer pricing is not ordinary. It's an economic study and not accounting. So there's a part where the information is verified in the taxpayer, the active functions, activities, risk incurred, the characteristic of this taxpayer. This is the starting point, verified and known. Based on this and functional analysis, you have the second phase of this economic study, which is comparability study. You look for external data in the marketplace. Who would be comparable to this functional profile? And there is a huge difficulty. Even dealing with the fourth and sixth method based on margin, TNN on, even in these where it's not a tight jacket like the transactional methods, even for them, there's a huge difficulty to compare one taxpayer to the next one, transaction to transaction. So this difficulty, as a custom, it reduces from it comes to the use of foreign data, 27 countries with institutional differences. There's an alignment of institutions allowing never seen before supranational that converges in such a way to the economy of these countries, even those that don't have the same currency. The import of data from one to other country requires identifiable and easy adjustments regarding econometrics. If you work in an economy that's big like USA and you have two smaller like Canada and Mexico in the map environment, the exchange of data of both countries is subject to some comparability studies, but it's more into the intuition side. But when you work with a very big economy like Brazil's and others, China, India, and a controlled economies with intervention of the state, closed economies with duanas, taxes that are too high and controlled prices in several sectors. You have just a semi-state, semi-private body. So it's more a macroeconomic environment different from they will have in other countries. So just the comparability is adjustment the macroeconomic level that we see worldwide. It's not enough. It's feasible if it's more sophisticated to understand that we will have to innovate in Brazil. Adjustments of comparability. We will have to have new subjectiveness in which comparability adjustments it would be right to reach arm's length. How to specify a customs barrier, in-house, SST, PIS/COFINS, monophasic. These are taxes, how we would identify and work with them, capital cost. So all the institutional framework that specify things in a very peculiar way based on these comparabilities adjustments would be important and perhaps different, innovative and complex. The level of uncertainty and complexity is not smaller than the level of uncertainties, complexity. We will have to do something, a system. Now, optional opt-in, yes, is what we advocate, where we could perhaps use with in a cooperation with the excise, expert data, work with the Brazil's market reality, looking thousand aspects regarding confidentiality on the tax side. So I think we have conditions and working the assumption that the old option is Brazil not to be in that very specific field thing, not to be the that we say those things we only have in Brazil. So if we have just in our system the guidelines, the two keep in the guidelines, it's going to be spectacular. The five methods will be that we have in the guideline in the proposal I have made. We work with the idea that in our law we would have equivalent to Article 991 and 292. It would this not stand on the not also OECD environment. We could have a correspondent adjustment according to the domestic legislation. If we would do this, it's difficult to argument with any member state did not completely converge to the arm's length standard. But is below this I insert in the toolkit of the income here document a good chapter with all the methodology of functional analysis and guidelines. I continue this and bring this, and then I could by safe in procedural aspects, I could remit to a normative instruction where the inland revenue could pre-publish what could be the outcome of a comparability analysis unilaterally made by the excise based on the data of the excise to for functional aspects. If the comparability analysis is within the methodology of guidelines, just the database is a database. If not used, it would be secret. If the database is used and with the support of countries. I like the point made by Anna with the collaboration of partner countries. Let's use this collaboration of partnering countries to import data and conciliate. So in this line, that is comparability analysis, we could, by the end of the day, answering the question of Gustav, have a method that absolutely is not compatible, is within the use of enforcement of arms and principle, not adjustments of comparability that's innovative and complex that we will have to do to adapt to foreign data. 30 seconds to end. I agree with the point of Ricardo, and I think Gustavo also, in the assumption of adjustments made. This should not be only for income tax. If we work with a multinational company, we define the fair price, market price, and is for the purpose of income taxes X. This should also have a reflex on customs and reflex on remittance for both ways. With this, I wrap up my comments. I hope within the given 10 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Romero. Thank you, Ana Carolina, for the comments. Very pertinent. And now, Professor Paulo Vitor will take the floor. We have two questions here addressed from the audience, Michel Presepioca and Tiago Albuquerque, one related to harmonization of ISS, PIS and COFINS, the three taxes, and is there any requirement, constitutional requirement, to harmonize the rules of ISS, PIS and COFINS, and the concepts and premises about export, import of services? And Tiago requests come back to the theme, the central theme concerning tax in times of COVID. So the donation, the legitimacy of donation, if the donation done by companies in this context of pandemic, when done public interest and interest of the company itself, if it's possible to sustain legitimacy. So Tiago gave the example of a bank that does a donation, has a public interest to improve a sewage problem, well known by everybody. At the same time, the legal company has a margin from the point of view it is helping to maintain the client, the general public can identify itself with the company. Paulo Vitor, please. Good afternoon. Good evening. Yeah. I would like to greet my colleagues, Eugenio, Maria, Ana Carolina, and Romero, Valéria, Ricardo, Maitto, my friend. I thank the invitation via President of IBDT, Ricardo Maris, and Professors Luiz Eduardo Schweir and Luiz Neto, Rodrigo Maitto, making this table. And I would like to start the first question that was placed, kind of disclaimer initially. These questions, we internally tried to group some questions and themes. It's not strange that I refer, for instance, Michelle's question. The wording was not exactly in this way. Correct us if we did not do the right interpretation of your words. You all. The questions are related to subjects that sometimes we get some surprise. I had not considered that, as Michelle has said, and the others, we have some thoughts about it already. Concerning harmonization, Michelle, in the end, asked if is it interesting to look for this harmonization, ISS separated from PIS/COFINS. In import-export, what's import-export in terms of service? It's interesting to look for it, is placed. So in terms of regulation, is it any necessity or in our system any previous understanding to look for this harmonization? This problem in Brazil exists because we deal with different taxes with a conceptual optic point of view. For foreigners, maybe it's amazing to discuss something like that because I'm dealing with the same phenomenon, exports of services and municipality tax. The consequences completely different, concepts based, totally different, looking for the same phenomena. Okay, it's federal, PIS and COFINS, they are federal taxes. That's our reality. We face it constantly. And I do not have time to consider it deeply, but my intention is explaining that, yes, there is the necessity, obligation on the part of the state to look for harmonization in this aspect. First, German people talk a lot about a concept that I have a big difficulty to translate into Portuguese. It's in their legal system, Vorgerechtigkeit. It's difficult to translate that into Portuguese, but a German teacher taught me that, in his opinion, be internal consistency. So when you have a certain discussion, you have to have coherence. If you adopt the parameters to reach a certain finality today and violates equality, so tomorrow you have to adopt an opposite parameter. So what are the parameters and finalities in terms of tax, in terms concerning IPs, ISS and PIS/COFINS in Portuguese? So we're talking about tax on added value in a certain extent. ISS is not exactly that, it's accumulative. So it's not, but we're talking about international transaction and common to those countries. That's the origin and destination. So that's the tax genesis, PIS and COFINS, importation of assets and services, goods and services. And in PIS/COFINS, it's clear that you adopt the principle of destination. I would say you put origin out and destination will tax. So that's the same way of thinking, same reasoning, but it's there in the debate of IPI genesis. People criticize the tax on import IPI. It's obvious, it's principle of destination. If industrialized product is not submitted to a certain tax, as it is done in Brazil, it's a problem of origin and destination. It seems it's the same justification, subjacent. Non-oneration of PIS and COFINS in import, exportation, and exoneration of PIS and COFINS in exportation. The idea of internal consistency. It seems that there is the obligation of harmonization, mainly when you get to the conclusion that in reality what we have now, the concepts that guide municipalities tax, ISS in the municipality of São Paulo, and in the federal revenue, disparity is too big. It does not make sense. There is no coherence with the justification of the tax or the donation. Someone is wrong. It's not possible to consider that different parameters are correct at the same time, i.e., justification of the theme we are discussing, taxing importation and not taxing exportation. So the Brazilian state is obliged to do it, maybe to be a complementary regulation to define the harmonization. So a question about to characterize the exportation of services, the law that was passed on about it by the high courts, adopting the result, the concept of utility concept. It seems so difficult to answer this question. So the opinion is difficult to do the interpretation here, legal opinion about it. Let us say that you're taking determination of certain terms to do according to Eros Grau. I'm not talking about concepts and terms of concept. I with difficulty to do the interpretation. It will be difficult to know exactly and compare exactly what we have here concerning the subject in a very objective way. It's easier to understand if we analyze the criteria, and there are criticisms, just one that is presented here. I underlined the text that is in the award that was presented by Minister Faria. The number is 587,403. In Rio Grande do Sul, is the in the end of the report. Maybe this is the adoption of the result as an utility. It's not clear, it's not fair, and it's not clear. So what's important? What's the intention of the acquiring party abroad? So when the project acquired and finished can be executed anywhere according to the hiring party, it's not considered export of service, even if it's sent abroad. uh, so if it can expressly fix the intention for exports purposes. So express intention of elaboration for export is something so difficult to do the interpretation. Being objective is very difficult. So the word per se, and yesterday Faria has presented clearly that the result as useful item is characterized when it's clear that it can be done only abroad. But when I read the award and I see the real intention of the acquiring party when the project is finished and can be executed anywhere according to the hiring party's decision. So I have a doubt. So it means if the project was done to be executed abroad, but in a certain way, I can consider that it can be done everywhere, anywhere. Anywhere means including the national territory or not. So it's a gray area. That concrete case that was already sentenced, already awarded, it says it cannot be done, and at the same time it says it can be done any place. So to be done and used abroad only, it's very difficult to say that it can only ipsos facto done abroad. So what we have here, it can be done only abroad, and as a fact, and the intention of the contract is doing it abroad. Is the intention also implicit in the same relation? You may have a case where the contract can be done any place, but it's clear that it's done to be used abroad, to be executed abroad. I can have a case where it can be only executed abroad, but the characteristics of the project say that the real intention of the contract may not be so clear. I would say that there is a trend in the terms of the high courts concerning result as utility, and in this matter, it is very clear and objective, much more than the ordinance that was given in São Paulo. I believe that what has been said in the legal opinion in the state of São Paulo, it's not pari passu. Anyway, it's necessary to acknowledge that this award does not give a high level of security and safety for the taxpayer in terms of services. Second point, deductibility of donation. I would like to confirm in time, for instance, I don't have any time, so I'll try to use the rest of my presentation, the time I have.
So then, Eugenio and Zé Maria, interrupt me as you feel fit. Well, there's a debate that it's advanced and public hearings that I will summarize in two positions of two well-known professors, Luiz Eduardo Chuveira and Marias de Oliveira, deductibility of donations. I have a position of Professor Ricardo Marias de Chuveira. These donations are income available, and there's no way to deny taxation or I have another point, the position by Professor Schwery. The first one was Maris. At least one share of donations might be embraced, at least in Brazil, by immunity rules. There's no time to dig down on the immunity rules by Professor Schwery, but it's important to summarize the pillars as it's seen the problem by him. Immunity rules in Brazil reveal situations with absence of tax paying conditions because paying taxes capacity is the capacity of arising resources from the economic domain to the public. So taxes, it's having resources being shifted from private to public domain. And when I give an entity, public entity, and then he's going to build in the article to be published, he will build this concept. He said, how can I get a share of something to take into the public domain if this something in its whole, the amount donated, is already in public domain? Of course, regarding this, I must face a very important argument, and I've been thinking about it ever since, of Andrés Baez saying, but then I am attributed to the private agent donating in a way the capacity of choosing budgets in lieu of the values being placed on public budget and the state defining its priorities of expenditures or investment. I have an agent of economic domain who note an agent that make the choices through a deduction of a donation, let's say 1 million reais, and therefore, as an example, this 1 million reais will have its earmarked destined by the agent who donated. And Andrés Baez said, I cannot have such interference by a private agent in public policies. The counter argument by Professor Schueri, this is a question without answer, but perhaps many constitutional laws, including Brazil's, ensuring some immunities does not tolerate and don't want to live with this margin of freedom, or perhaps this is not of the many expressions of, I'd say, counter-majority prerogatives. Several constitutional orders, including ours, it's from institutes counter-majority. So in favor of minorities, I have some exceptions where I accept some counter-majority mechanisms. So perhaps in countermeasure, the sphere of freedom wouldn't be ensured to certain agents that might be the minority of a society, political, ethnical. So this freedom of resources that at principle come from itself to interfere even in public policies. Don't you think the constitutional order don't measure this? Perhaps the answer is the middle. So I cannot have an extreme interference of certain economic groups or agents with sturdy economic authority, but I cannot go to the opposite point and deny this by its full. Of course, I'm talking about scenarios where the donation is allocated out of the economic domain. Let's say a bank that donates within COVID-19. So it's difficult if it is characterized as something placed in public domain out of the economic. It does not seem to make that difference. The fact that it benefits the image of a bank, benefits the consumer market of the bank. So let's say within COVID-19 context, it's upholding the interested parties' health. So there are many reasons for this. The bank image perhaps can use of this good image or spontaneous advertisement. So it's very interesting, I will think. Perhaps Professor Paulo, please, sorry, Professor, could you just go to conclusions because we have to hand down a message regarding research. Let's think PEPS is within the context because companies are criticized due to the morality of taxes. Let's say if one that pays good taxes does not enjoy this image, will I deny any other effect because it's benefiting from the good image of good taxpayer? It doesn't seem to make that difference. The central point is finding a balance. So not denying the freedom for public policies and extreme freedom in an extreme situation of regarding some economic groups. I think these are my remarks. Professor José Maria, I apologize for the time.
Okay, so we close this discussion. Thank you all colleagues for the dedication, facing all the questions that came to us during the day and preparing the answers. So thank you, the participants of this forum. Thank you all. And I believe that we are closing the second day very brilliantly. And tomorrow, the forum is fantastic. And tomorrow we are here again, and the organizers with Sanctuary and with Flavio and Rodrigo Maitto, all of them. Now, Eugenio will take the floor. A research that we will do now. Good evening to everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, José Maria, for the participation of all the panelists here. Thank you for the audience. I would like to let you know, all the participants, that at the end of this panel, we will have a research about the second day of seminar.
E nós agradeceríamos muito a atenção e as respostas de vocês, tá bom? Para que a gente possa continuar melhorando e sempre ter um congresso que já é sabido e conhecido na área tributária. É um congresso muito importante na área tributária, mas algo que se a gente sempre puder melhorar, a gente está aberto a isso. Muito obrigado a todos.